And so now I'm going to talk about these modes, and it kind of blends together, right? Because they overlap a lot. So first of all, working in-house. This is all the translators that I've met. This is like what they say. This is the way to get started translating, because right, you can work for a translation agency that can be anywhere in the world, Japan, US, especially for those two languages, right? You can also work remotely for them, full-time and in an actual, as an employee and not as an independent contractor. And as I was saying, a lot of companies in Japan have global subsidiaries or bases in other places. There's a lot of communication between the companies internally, but also they're marketing products usually in English, and so they need these kinds of things done. The main benefits about working in-house, I guess they're obvious, but I'll go ahead and, so it's and I'm going to say this, the bar is very low actually to get a job in-house, but that's not to say that they don't care about the quality or something like that. You'll have to demonstrate your language capacity, right? So if you have a JLPT1 or something sort of like that, that's basically all you need to get one of these in-house positions. And a lot of times they seem to prefer people that are, very fresh, and then they can train them up. And if you work in translation agency, then you'll get experience doing all of the different, working with all the stages of the translation process. But if you work sort of like I did with working at TBK, I was able to gain not only translation knowledge, how to do that, but also like all of this technical specialized knowledge about manufacturing and specifically the kinds of things that we are manufacturing there. And right, like, casting and cutting and assembling like huge metal parts, like sounds like pretty easy, but there's a lot of jargon and stuff like that. And it's also like the things that you learn there, I've really been able to apply them in a lot of situations. The thing about working in-house is that often you're asked to be at least a translator of documents and an interpreter for meetings, phone calls, whenever they need you, really. In my case, it's a very small sort of company, and so I ended up doing a lot. Sometimes I was out there measuring the parts that came off the lab, and on very bad days. But this kind of thing happens, and it can be fun. You can really be a part of the team. But there are different tensions that come up too in interpreting. So interpreting, generally, like I said, I don't do it anymore. And I used to do it a lot when I worked at TBK. It's not that TBK is bad, but you have to have a very high energy sort of personality, I think. And you have to be very witty, able to think on your feet. You have to also be able to dress nice and stuff like this. You have to be the face of a lot of things that way. And so this is the real sweet spot sort of. Document review is, as I said before, this falls under sort of the contract category normally, because you'll usually get an offer to do document review as for a specific project or a specific case. And what this is, it's also called discovery. It's all done electronically now, but basically, whenever a company or an individual is under investigation for something, and this could be, right, it could involve charges or some kind of litigation or something like this, but it can also be like as a part of due diligence for mergers and things like this. They just have to like go through a certain amount of documents according to antitrust laws and different things like this. And right, I don't know if you guys know, but right when there's litigation is going to happen, say a class action suit or something of this group of people against this company, both sides sort of have to internally go through and produce all of the documents that in their possession that might be relevant to the case. And so this is the process of combing through all of those documents and looking at them for things like relevance, attorney-client privilege, something they'll teach you about that. You don't have to necessarily know. But right, so you can get a lot of insider knowledge. This doesn't usually involve translation per se, though you can be asked to translate specific things. But right, this is the kind of thing they won't let you work remotely because of security stuff. So once you get a job like this, you're sort of committed to a 9 to 5 or whatever their schedule is. You have to drop everything else and go do this. But I worked on one of these for a year here in Seattle, and honestly, it was great because I had a lot of freelance things going on in the background. But it was a team of probably 20 people, 25 people, right? And everybody's very smart. Everybody's very good at this kind of thing if they're doing this. And so, right, the norm is for bilingual admitted attorneys in whatever state you're doing this in, and people who hold JDs to have the first preference to work on these kind of jobs. But then after that, which they always run out, sort of the translators will be allowed to creep in afterwards. And it's not such a bad thing, though. But right, so I made a lot of really close relationships doing this kind of thing. I met Terry actually doing something like this. But then again, at that point, I had traveled to New York to do that job for a month and a half. And they locked us in a warehouse, and we had to do 60 hours a week. And it involved more MT post editing, but they didn't tell anybody that beforehand. But still a worthwhile experience for the people you can meet and the sort of institutional knowledge that you'll gain. And the way to see, I mean, right, if the idea of like combing through like people's computers and like looking at everything, every email they ever sent sort of like appeals to you on any level, I would recommend it. Okay, anyway, so this is a very good one. Once you've translated a little bit, or if anybody here, right, is an attorney or has a JD, then you should definitely look into this kind of thing if you haven't already. And then so coming back to freelance more solidly, right, self-employment is sort of, seems like a dream, right? The income can seem really good sometimes. Like you'll have a job that you think, oh, like it was this big, and then I did it in like an hour. So if I calculated, I made like $300 an hour doing that job. But then if you get one of these a month only or something, right? It's not enough. So the income can seem good sometimes, but it's very unsteady. So this is why you have to build a network of clients that you work with regularly, and right. So direct clients or translation agencies or whatever, this is really based on your preference, how much you want to be involved in the steps that I showed before. Right, and I would have probably showed you some more examples of things that I've like actually translated, or given you names of people that I've worked for and things like that, but I can't, because as a freelancer, you're always in almost all cases, like committed to confidentiality, because most of these things don't really.
Is this because a lot of the document review that you're speaking of has to do with the legal system specifically, or aside from that as well?
Well, very much in general, like if you register with an agency, signing an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, is going to be basically part of like signing up with them. So the default is like any job you work on, don't talk about it, or don't really put it out there. And the document review is very tight. You have to sign a lot of things, and like that's why you have to be there. Like here in Seattle, I would go to the office, and they had one specific room in the firm that we were allowed to be in. It was a very nice room, but we stayed there. We have huge binders, hundreds of pages for the case, the background and stuff that you have to read through. None of that can leave that room. You know what I mean? So they're very, very strict about that. Actually, the job I worked on in New York, the computers that we were using didn't have internet connections. There were maybe 30 people in our room, and there was one computer at the end that you could like Google things on. They were like, because they said, if you put in too long of a phrase in Google, that's basically public, and we can't have any of this out. So maybe you could consider that overkill, but basically that's always assume that things are confidential. I think is the safest way to go. And I've often asked, even if it seems obviously that it would be fine to share or something, say it's posted publicly and my name has been on it, on the internet. I think it's always good to check with the client. So back to this, it's definitely rewarding in terms of scheduling. Being your own boss, that whole fantasy can be pretty cool, but it's also stressful because, as a freelancer, your legal status is that you're self-employed, so you have to do the registration things, tax registration, business license registration. You have to pay the taxes, which is a lot actually. So and you have to work out how to navigate these kind of systems, right? Like if you set up quarterly estimated tax payment, then it's not such a big deal, and you're not surprised by maybe how much. Like I was just this past month or this month, by how much I had to pay in taxes. See, I still haven't worked on it. I'm not very ambitious. So there are a lot of things on the sort of organizational end that I haven't developed as much because I'd seen this as sort of an interim thing before I got into school here. But it's a lot of fun. But it's a lot of work because the other thing is not just doing the translation itself, all the peripheral things, and then just maintaining client relationships, going back and doing these revisions and things, out of good faith that you don't really are going to get paid for or anything like that. So there are a lot of benefits, and if you want to know more about the technical and legal sort of things about this, you can ask me, but you should probably check yourself. If you go to the government websites, and they'll lay it out pretty clearly. And so and this is mainly oriented towards freelance translation also. But these are some ways that you can get to this. I think we're running out of time. So we'll sort of speed up a little bit. So contests, these aren't really in any order. I should have ordered them somehow. Contests, there are a lot of translation contests, and they can be professional, this business commercial thing, or literary. But if you try to do if you pay attention to literary stuff, it's I think more fun. But it also automatically, if you can do literary things, people will assume that you can do technical things. I don't think people assume the other way. You go to conferences. I can't believe I haven't mentioned it yet, but Japan Association of Translators is a huge professional organization. It's just people that translate back and forth Japanese to English, English to Japanese. It's mostly based in Japan. I'm a member of it. It costs like $100 a year or something. But they put on IJET conference it's twice annually, and they alternate between Japan and somewhere in the U.S. And going to these things, I went to one when it was in Seattle. I was very lucky, just when I joined JAT, and right, the people that you can meet here, everybody's networking. So freelancers sort of have maybe a reputation even among ourselves of being sort of like reclusive and like hiding in the basement, like tapping away or something like this. But right, people really come out of the woodwork, and it's pretty interesting. And right, and there are sessions that very very specific sessions, how to develop specific elements of your business, things about translating itself. Yeah, I hope nobody came thinking this was going to be about that. Actual translation strategies, you have to look for that on your own. Right, but you can find all kinds of great information there, meet good people, and it's really worth the investment, whatever it costs. In-house work, again, this really legitimizes you because you've gotten some training. You're usually going to be working with someone who's more experienced than you, and with experts in some kind of field, and whether that's one you continue to work in or not, like, is not always relevant. You can also volunteer. I think that there have been a lot of volunteer translations and opportunities to do that kind of thing. Like, after 3/11, there was a lot of volunteer-based Japanese to English translation. And the other way. So, that's a very special, different case. But there are all kinds of different efforts that you can sort of try to help out by volunteering and translating that way. Working with established translators, established freelancers. This is something that I also did. The way that I actually moved into freelance was by taking care of the checking and editing section on the list earlier for a translator who I happened to meet. Right, it's a very chance kind of thing, but I was lucky enough to meet him, and he worked in Ballard, and so we could meet up in person. He would give me his editing work to do. I would check it against the Japanese. So, it's really an informative thing to be able to see how someone is actually dealing with every point, basically. And then I guess you could go to a fancy translation school or something. There are lots of those, but I think that those. My impression of most of those is that they're more geared toward literary type of things. But it'd be very bad if I didn't tell you all. Maybe but there's a technical Japanese program here at UW, which is seems very good. And I haven't had really much contact with them or anything. But you can take courses there, a year-long 3-part course there. As part of an MA somewhere else, or you can do it right as a professional. It just gives you a certificate of, but it's basically oriented towards technical translation, and you'll take advanced Japanese courses, and you'll take engineering-oriented courses as well, and work on those kinds of things. But you should. Definitely look into that if you're here anyway and you're interested. I didn't even know about that until I went to the IJET that was here in Seattle, and there was a presentation about it. So, right, here's some more